The morning in the small town of Springfield, Ohio, begins with the sweet aroma from Sunnyside Bakery. Rachel Harrison wakes up at 5 in the morning, gives a gentle kiss to her 3-year-old son Evan, who is still sleeping, and quietly leaves the house. Her days always start early and run long. Rachel's hands possess a certain strength developed from kneading bread dough. Having lived alone in this town for 14 years, her face bears deeper wrinkles than other women her age, but her eyes hold not resignation, but quiet determination. Beneath the modest apron she wears lies the weight of a life filled with hardship. The bakery where Rachel works sits quietly in a residential area, a little away from the town center. The owner, Mrs. Johnson, is a kind elderly woman who warmly welcomed young Rachel when she was cast out from her home 14 years ago. She was Rachel's benefactor. When Rachel first started working at the shop, she was 8 months pregnant and could barely manage to bake bread. However, Mrs. Johnson never abandoned her, saying, "Life has turning points. What matters is how you choose to live afterward," giving Rachel hope. Evan is growing up without any memory of his father. The 3-year-old seems perfectly happy with just his mother's love, but Rachel sometimes feels complex emotions when watching her son play with other children. Evan is remarkably talented at drawing. His crayon pictures are so delicate and beautiful that they hardly seem like the work of a 3-year-old. Neighbors praise him, saying he might become an artist someday, but every time Rachel sees her son's talent, certain memories come flooding back. On the other side of town stands the impressive building of Harrison Real Estate. The company's president, Michael Harrison, is such an influential figure that everyone in town knows him. His wife Susan serves as the chairwoman of the local charity organization and is known as a central figure in the town's social circles. Their mansion is located in the town's most exclusive residential area, and every year their Christmas party brings together the town's prominent citizens. Michael and Susan have 2 daughters, Rachel and Ashley. However, the townspeople only know Ashley, who graduated from medical school with excellent grades and currently works as a resident at the state hospital. Ashley is her parents' pride and has even been featured in the local newspaper as the town's shining star. Her photograph is prominently displayed in the reception area of her parents' company, and visitors are invariably told about her achievements. Once upon a time, Michael and Susan had another daughter. But 14 years ago, on a certain day, they completely erased that daughter's existence. For the townspeople, the Harrisons' eldest daughter might as well not exist. Occasionally, longtime residents would ask, "Didn't you have another daughter?" But Michael and Susan would always reply, "No, Ashley is our only daughter." The events of 14 years ago were a past that the Harrison family wanted to erase. At that time, 17-year-old Rachel was among the top students in her class, and her admission to Harvard University was virtually assured. Her parents, Michael and Susan, were proud of their daughter's future and boasted about her to neighbors. Her younger sister Ashley also looked up to her excellent older sister. However, Rachel harbored a significant secret in her heart. She had been feeling changes in her body for 3 months, and when she finally sought a doctor's diagnosis, it was revealed that she was pregnant. The father was Jason Cooper, a popular student from the same high school. He was the captain of the school's football team and the object of many female students' admiration. Rachel tried many times to talk to Jason, but he always claimed to be too busy to listen. When she finally told him the truth, Jason's reaction was cold. "Are you sure it's really my kid? Do you have proof?" he demanded, then declared, "I'm still in high school. I've got a college scholarship lined up. I can't let this ruin my future." A week later, Jason's family suddenly left town. The school explained it as a transfer due to his father's job, but Rachel knew the truth. Jason's parents had heard the situation from their son and decided to move to escape the problem. Left to bear the burden alone, Rachel had no choice but to tell her parents. However, this decision required tremendous courage. Michael and Susan were well known as an exemplary couple in the community. Family reputation was everything to them, and Rachel feared what reaction her pregnancy would provoke. On Friday evening after dinner, Rachel gathered her family in the living room. Michael was reading his newspaper, Susan was knitting, and Ashley was doing homework while occasionally glancing at her sister, noticing that Rachel's face was pale. "Mom, Dad, Ashley," Rachel began with a trembling voice. "I have something important to tell you." Michael looked up from his newspaper, and Susan stopped her knitting. "What is it, Rachel? Did you hear something from Harvard?" Susan asked with anticipation. Rachel took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." In that moment, the air in the living room froze. Michael's newspaper dropped to the floor, Susan's knitting needles slipped from her hands, and Ashley froze while staring at her sister, still gripping her homework pen. "What did you say?" Michael was the first to speak. His voice was low and carried a dangerous tone. "Say that again." "Dad, I'm pregnant," Rachel repeated, holding back tears. "I'm 3 months along." Michael stood up and loomed over Rachel. "Pregnant? What were you thinking? You're only 17 years old." His voice shook with anger. "Who's the father? Who did this to you?" "Jason Cooper," Rachel answered in a small voice. "But he's not here anymore. His family moved away." Susan suddenly stood up. "You've ruined our reputation." Her voice was shrill and hysterical. "Do you know what the neighbors will say? What about the people at church? Your father's business associates?" "Mom, help me," Rachel reached out toward her mother. But Susan pulled away from her daughter. "Help you? This is a problem you brought on yourself. Have you ever considered how embarrassed we'll be?" Ashley spoke up. "I can't believe it. You're supposed to be my older sister." Her voice was filled with contempt. "What am I supposed to tell my friends? My sister got pregnant in high school? It's humiliating." Rachel was stunned by her family's reaction. Somewhere in her heart, she had expected that while they might be angry at first, they would ultimately support her. However, standing before her weren't her loving family members, but strangers who seemed to care only about appearances. "Dad, Mom, please," Rachel pleaded through her tears. "I can't do this alone. Help me." Michael coldly declared, "Help you? This is the path you chose. Take responsibility for yourself." "But I'm still in high school. How am I supposed to raise a child alone?" "That's your problem," Michael's voice held not a trace of warmth. "Get out now. You're no longer my daughter." Rachel stared at her father in disbelief. "Dad, are you serious?" "I'm serious. I don't need a shameless daughter like you in this house." Susan sided with her husband. "Get out. Bringing shame to the family. Never show your face in front of us again." Ashley stood silently, but her eyes showed only contempt for her sister. "This is seriously the worst. How am I supposed to explain this to my friends? You're making me look bad too." Rachel understood that her family had completely abandoned her. The family she thought had showered her with love for 17 years wouldn't support her in her time of need, instead, they were casting her out. This reality was far more painful than the fact of her pregnancy. "Fine," Rachel said, wiping her tears. "I'll leave. But someday, I'll prove that you were wrong." She ran up to her room and hastily packed her belongings. She stuffed clothes, textbooks, a little cash, and childhood photos into bags. An hour later, Rachel headed to the front door with her heavy bags. No one in her family saw her off. Michael and Susan remained in the living room, and Ashley had shut herself in her own room. When Rachel looked back one last time, she couldn't see the people she had considered family for 17 years. In the cold night air, Rachel walked dragging her heavy bags. She had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. A new life was growing in her womb, but there was no one to support her. For a 17-year-old girl, the road ahead seemed endlessly long. However, in the depths of Rachel's heart, a small flame burned. Along with the sadness of being abandoned by her family, a determination to live by her own strength was taking root. Even alone, she would protect this child. And someday, she would prove that her family had been wrong. With these thoughts in her heart, Rachel continued walking down the dark night road. Years passed, and that winter night seemed like a distant memory. Now, on a cold afternoon, Rachel was reading a picture book with Evan in their apartment's living room when the doorbell rang. Visitors were rare at her small apartment, so who could it be? Looking through the door's peephole, Rachel gasped. There stood her parents, whom she hadn't seen once in 14 years. Michael looked considerably thinner than before, with more gray hair. His face showed deep fatigue, whether from illness or other causes. Susan, standing beside him, also showed the changes of 14 years. Her face, once known as the flower of local society, had lost its former radiance, perhaps due to worry. Rachel hesitated for a moment about whether to open the door. But when she heard Evan innocently ask, "Mommy, is someone here?" she made up her mind. For her son's sake, she shouldn't run from this confrontation. When she opened the door, Michael and Susan stood frozen at the sight of their daughter. Michael spoke with difficulty. "Rachel, would you listen to us?" His voice lacked its former authority and seemed weak. "Please, could you give us just a little time?" Rachel hesitated but ultimately opened the door to let her parents in. Entering the small living room, Michael and Susan looked around. The modest but clean room, handmade curtains, and their son's pictures hanging on the wall, in this small space were traces of the new life their daughter had built. Then Evan peeked out from the kitchen. The 3-year-old boy looked at the unknown visitors with curious eyes. The moment Michael and Susan saw their grandson, their expressions changed. "What is this?" Michael murmured. His gaze was fixed on the drawing that Evan held in his hand, created with crayons. The picture was so delicate and beautiful that it hardly seemed like the work of a 3-year-old, with remarkably skillful composition and color usage. "Mommy, who are these people?" Evan asked his mother. Rachel placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "Evan, these people are..." Oh, she hesitated for a moment. "They're guests." However, Michael continued staring at his grandson. In Evan's drawing, he was finding something he had almost forgotten. The technique, color sense, and composition of the picture, all of it was remarkably similar to his own work from his youth. "Who drew this picture?" Michael asked with a trembling voice. "Evan drew it," Rachel answered. "This child loves drawing." Michael stood up and looked at the other pictures hanging on the wall. Every picture showed talent that seemed impossible for a 3-year-old's work. And that talent was unmistakably the same as what he had possessed in his youth. "This can't be," Michael murmured. Susan also noticed her husband's change and began looking at their son's pictures. "Michael, these pictures, they're the same as mine." Michael's voice was trembling. "This child has the same talent I have." In fact, Michael had aspired to be a painter in his youth. He attended art school and dreamed of making a living in the art world. However, when his father died suddenly, he was forced to take over the family real estate business. He gave up his artistic dreams and walked the path of a businessman. For more than 40 years since then, he had kept his talent sealed away. "Dad," Rachel said quietly. "I knew you used to paint. I once found your old paintings in the attic." Michael looked at his daughter. "You knew?" "Yes. They were very beautiful paintings." Why didn't you continue? I had to take over the family business. I needed to abandon impractical dreams. Michael looked at Evan's pictures again. He felt that the dream he had given up was alive in his grandson. And suddenly, the events of 14 years ago came flooding back. When Rachel confessed her pregnancy, he had cast out his daughter out of concern for appearances. But now he realized, he had done to his daughter exactly what his father had done to him. He had forced her to give up dreams and only recognized practical choices. Michael's voice began to tremble. I did the same thing to you. Rachel was puzzled by her father's words. What do you mean? My father made me give up art. He said the family business was important and denied my dreams. And I did the same thing to you. When you tried to make your own life choices, I wouldn't allow it. Susan was also moved by her husband's words. Michael, we were wrong, Susan. When Rachel needed help the most, we abandoned her. Michael stood before his daughter and bowed deeply. Rachel, I won't ask for forgiveness. What we did is unforgivable. However, I'm truly proud that you raised this child so well on your own. Hearing her father's apology, Rachel was struck by complex emotions. These were words she had waited 14 years to hear. But at the same time, she strongly felt that these words were now too late. It's too late now, Rachel said coldly. When I was at my most difficult time, you weren't there. When Evan was born, when he had fevers, when he took his first steps, you weren't there. Michael accepted his daughter's anger. You're absolutely right. We were the worst parents. At that moment, Evan innocently approached Michael. Grandpa, look at this picture. The little boy held out his latest work. It was a picture of a family, his mother and himself, and a son drawn in place of the absent father. Michael received his grandson's picture and began to cry. Grandpa? Evan asked, tilting his head. Yes, Michael answered with a trembling voice. I'm your grandpa. Evan smiled happily. I really do have a grandpa. Mommy, I have a grandpa too. Seeing her son's pure joy, Rachel's heart wavered. No matter how much she resented her parents, the fact remained that Evan had grandparents. And this child had the right to know family love. Rachel, Susan spoke up. We were truly foolish. We cared only about appearances and lost the most important thing. Rachel remained silent for a long time, but finally spoke. I can't say I forgive you. But for Evan's sake, I might consider gradually building a relationship. Hope appeared on Michael and Susan's faces. Thank you, Rachel. But there are conditions, Rachel continued with a stern expression. Never abandon us again. And if you ever hurt Evan, I'll immediately cut off the relationship. I promise, Michael answered immediately. We'll never make the same mistake again. Watching Evan happily talk to his grandparents while showing them his pictures, Rachel felt complex emotions. This wasn't forgiveness, it was a choice. She had learned over these 14 years that true family isn't just about blood relations, but about being there to support each other through difficult times. However, she wanted to give Evan the opportunity to receive more love. 6 months passed. The relationship between Rachel and her parents was changing slowly but surely. Michael began visiting Evan every Saturday, spending time drawing together. The grandfather, who had taken up his art supplies again after years of keeping them sealed away, enjoyed creative activities with his grandson. Susan also began bringing homemade treats for Evan, treasuring her time with her grandson. Rachel had started working at a new job. She was hired as an assistant for educational programs at the local art museum, teaching painting to children. The compassion for others she learned from Mrs. Johnson and the strength gained from her own struggles were being put to good use in this work. Thanks to an account that Michael had secretly set up for educational expenses, Evan was able to attend a high-quality kindergarten. However, the peaceful days were suddenly shattered. One evening, a familiar man appeared at Rachel's apartment. Jason Cooper, the man who had abandoned Rachel 14 years ago and fled from responsibility. While he retained traces of his high school appearance, he gave off a somewhat tired impression. "Rachel, long time no see," Jason greeted her casually. "I saw an article about Evan's artwork in the local newspaper. Child prodigy artist," it said. "I never imagined I had a son." Rachel answered calmly, "You don't have a son. Evan's father is me. But you can't deny the blood connection, right? I should have rights as a father too." Jason's words had a calculating tone. A few days later, Jason appeared with a lawyer, claiming parental rights. "I want to properly develop my son's talent. I'm a successful businessman now. I can provide a much better environment than Rachel." However, his true purpose was to use Evan's talent for financial gain. A court battle began, but Rachel had powerful allies. Michael and Susan supported their daughter and grandson with all their strength, and the community rallied behind Rachel, who had raised Evan alone. Particularly, Mrs. Johnson's friends served as witnesses, testifying to Rachel's devoted efforts as a mother. Meanwhile, Jason's past was gradually revealed. He had gotten multiple women pregnant during college and fled responsibility each time. His current girlfriend was also pregnant, but he was trying to escape again. Furthermore, it was discovered that he had multiple unpaid child support cases and had been involved in fraudulent business dealings. Jason was completely cornered in court. "I was thinking of my son's future," he claimed, but the judge sternly pointed out, "You claim you didn't know about the child's existence for 14 years, so why are you suddenly asserting paternal rights now?" Ultimately, Jason was arrested on charges of multiple unpaid child support and fraud. His social credibility was completely destroyed, and he never appeared before Rachel and Evan again. After the incident was resolved, Rachel thought deeply about her relationship with her parents. Michael and Susan had supported her during difficult times and shown the bonds of true family. However, this didn't mean complete forgiveness. "Dad, Mom," Rachel said to her parents one day, "I haven't forgiven you. But for Evan's sake, and for our own sake, I want to build a new relationship." Michael nodded deeply. "That's enough. We can't change the past. But we want to treasure the time we have from now on." Evan's 4th birthday party included his grandparents. The little boy happily spent time with his grandparents and showed off his new pictures. In those pictures, his mother, himself, and his grandparents were drawn. Instead of the absent son, this time a rainbow was painted. Looking at that picture, Rachel thought, true family isn't just about blood relations, but grows from feelings of supporting each other through difficulties and caring for one another. The struggles of 14 years were never in vain. They made her strong and taught her what was truly important. And her son Evan continues to grow surrounded by love, cherishing his mother's strength, his grandparents' affection, and his own talent.